Breaker, this is the truck and tanker Yanker. I'm 10-8 with my 10 in the wind. My heaters are glowing, my manners are showing. Line her up, let her go, come on. I'm your travel agent with a story to tell. Let's go for a ride. Hey, it's a truck and tanker Yanker. I'm here to tell you a little story today. Well, I think I'll get right on to it. Now, when I was in business for myself, I had trucks domiciled in several different western cities. At one time, I had a total of 27 trucks and 49 employees. I always said I had 50, but that included me. But I was on the payroll, so I was an employee, and I did have to tell myself what to do. So anyway, but in one locality, all of my drivers were Russians. Now, that's a whole long story about how I ended up with all Russians in one locality, but I'll just tell you the short story, and that's because immigrants, for some reason or other, work better than the native bred born Americans, and they were less trouble because they came from a country where they had absolutely nothing, and they came here and they said, "You mean if I work harder, I get paid more?" Wasn't like that where they come from in a socialist communist system. And so those guys worked hard, and they bought their first houses while they worked for me, and they went full bore, and those guys knew how to live the American dream. Okay, that's about as close to politics as I want to get. But anyway, so I had quite a few Russian drivers working for me in this place, and one in particular was one of my better drivers, and I'll just use the code name Vladimir. All right. So anyway, Vladimir, he did quite a few different things for me, and he was a long-time worker, and he drove for an air freight company that I was leased to, and he drove for a few different outfits. But I'll just tell you two stories about Vladimir. Vladimir, he was hauling air freight and had a regular route from Seattle to Chicago. And anyway, and if you're familiar with air freight terminals at all, when you're going to airport, now for some of you, the uninitiated, you don't know what air freight is all about. You just think it's fast freight on the ground, but it's not. It's actually going from airport to airport, generally speaking, and it is fast, but it's just like what we generally did was we hauled international air freight from one international airport to another, and it's not that was the international part, but it was because we were hauling it from this airport, because that was our domicile, heading to this airport to put it on airplanes that were going to Germany, going to Sweden, going to Hong Kong, going to England, all points of the compass. They were going all over the place, and all those that I just named were major airlines. Lufthansa, I can't remember the Swedish one. Cargolux, maybe. Sorry if that's not Swedish, but it's Norwegian or something. British Air, Cathay, that'd be Hong Kong. Anyway, you get the idea. So we had air freight, and generally speaking, air freight is high dollar freight. Well, anyway, and so it takes specialized equipment and a special mindset, because it's all about hurry up and wait. Slam the doors in the trailer, put a giant bolt seal on, and it's hammer down till you get to where you're going, and get unloaded. You might have 5 drops at that particular airport, all the different airlines you got on, 5 drops, get it off, and now you just sit and wait. You gotta wait for airplanes to land so you have more freight to haul out of there. And that's basically what it comes down to. So anyway, the one thing about air terminals don't have a lot of room for trucks. I'll guarantee you that. Very little room. Everything is tight because the airport has, by square foot, probably super expensive property, and they just don't waste it on big trucks. So everything you do in there is just twisting and turning and trying to get into little tight holes, and cars are parked everywhere. It can be a real mess, and you really got to keep your eyes open and paying attention, and little mishaps are common. Anyway, Vladimir had a little mishap, and some guy was illegally parked, and Vladimir was trying to get his 53-foot trailer out a narrow itty-bitty gate where this guy illegally parked in and besides the gate. Anyway, long story short, he clipped this guy's van just a little bit. Well, Vladimir had told me about this. He said that if you're in trouble, this was in Chicago at O'Hare, and he said if you're in trouble with the police in Chicago, he said oftentimes you can buy a pencil for $300 that makes everything okay. He says you just buy pencil, everything okay. Anyway, so Vladimir called me at 2 o'clock in the morning. He's got a big problem. He just sideswiped some guy's van. Damage, not too bad. No damage on the truck. I'm speaking like Vladimir, obviously. Anyway, he was talking about, oh, the police, it's a big problem, and it's because he has a Russian accent. It was even a bigger problem because this was the late 90s, and Russians were pretty new to this country at that point. They'd all bugged out of Russia as soon as Gorbachev had opened up, especially the Christians, and Vladimir was one of the Christians, because that's a whole other story. I'll tell you all about that some other time. It's like they had it pretty rough over there, and I run team with these guys, and so I knew their stories. Well, anyway, Vladimir, he's talking to the police, the Chicago City police, and they're acting like it's all his fault. Yeah, it was partly Vladimir's fault. That guy was illegally parked, but apparently that guy was golden. He was from Chicago, or maybe he was in the same union or same mafia or same thing or whatever. Anyway, long story short, Vladimir's just trying to get through the paperwork and the red tape of having to deal with people that, generally speaking, don't like him just because of his accent. Anyway, so I'm trying to help him through this. Anyway, when all was said and done, Vladimir was like, the cops were gone, everything was gone, he's already heading down the road, and he called me on the phone, and he was so upset. He's like, I forgot to buy pencil! He's like, I could have not gone through all that difficulty if I just bought pencil. Now, you can determine whether or not buying a pencil is one thing or another, and whether or not Chicago City Kitties are one thing or another. That's the story as I know it. That's what the story that Vladimir told me. It's a story I knew to be generally true. That was in the late 90s. Now, maybe it's all different today, but that's the story. So anyway, that's a little bit about Vladimir. Really super nice guy. Big guy. Not any taller than me. I'm about 5'10", a little over 5'10". He was about the same height as me, but I tell you what, if you shook hands with Vladimir, it was like shaking hands with a 5-pound steak. It was a giant piece of meat. He had very thick, rounded shoulders, thick chest, but just a happy, he was bald up the middle, just a little fringe of hair around the side, just a happy, gregarious guy. Oh, Dennis, he would call me Dennis, and he just, oh, everything was so good, slapped me on the back, knocked me over. Anyway, that's Vladimir. He's just really super nice guy. Anyway, all that to get to this story here. So Vladdy was one of the guys I really liked. You know, I mean, there was a bunch of guys there I liked, but Vladdy, he was just a really super nice guy. Anyway, Vlad was working on one of my other deals at a different time, and I had triple trailers that we were hauling, basically LTL freight and triples, and we had an issue with another Russian driver, and we didn't quite know what the issue was. The one thing about the Russians is they're very secretive. They don't narc on anybody, because where they come from, if you narc on somebody, you give information, you're a not good guy. And all young men have compulsory military service there. And so when I'd be filling out an application, rather than have them try to stumble through the reading of it, because some of them couldn't hardly read English, and I'd help work them through it, and that type of thing. So I just ask them the questions to get them through an application. And I'd ask them about their military service. And well, I learned over a period of time that in Russia, they wore their military rank on their shoulder boards. They didn't, we stick them as patches or on lapels. And they wore them on their shoulder boards. So sergeant, actually it was not, it'd be any commissioned officer had a device on his shoulder board. Otherwise, non-commissioned, I think, had stripes or something like that. I might be wrong, but I do remember that the commissioned officers had a device on their shoulder boards. And I asked them, were you an officer? And they'd say, no. And they would wipe their shoulder board, meaning that they were not an officer. Because in order to become an officer over there, you had to basically sell out everybody. You had to show your patriotism for Mother Russia by selling somebody out, to show that Mother Russia was more important to you. And I could even tell you more about that. It was a terrible system. So much of the world wants that system for some reason. I don't understand it. But in selling out your family, your friends, your co-workers, in the military and that type of thing, they would even, as a matter of fact, a young lieutenant, he would go look for a wife. Once you became a young lieutenant, you went looking for a wife, and you looked for a wife who was going to sleep with all of your bosses, because that was the way you worked your way up the food chain. So you would go find a young woman who was comely, pretty, if you want to put it that way, pretty, and had the right kind of attitude and that kind of a thing, and basically start dating her. And it was unspoken because everybody understood how the system worked. So a young woman would look at this young lieutenant, and she knew what she would have to do if she was married to him. She'd have to sleep with all of his bosses. But she'd look at the young lieutenant as to whether or not he was a good climber or not. If he was going to make it far up into the upper ranks, if he could make it to general or colonel, then she would have a good lifestyle. If she just married some average Smo Joe that worked in a factory, which many of them did, she would not have much her entire life. So tying herself to a up and rising star in the military could give her a better lifestyle. And so it was a symbiotic relationship. It had nothing whatsoever to do with emotion, had nothing whatsoever to do with real love. It had to do with what I can get out of this situation. That's the kind of situation they were in. So Vladimir, or not Vladimir, but so I had this driver in this truck that his name was Sergey. I don't mind using his real name. He wasn't much, I'll tell you that. So Sergey was not one of the Christian guys. And he was in the truck, and I put probably 3 different guys to run team. They were all team trucks. I put 3 different guys in the truck with Sergey, Russian guys. And they would, and I say Russian, it could have been Belarusian, it could have been Georgian, it could have been Ukrainian. We just called them Russian. They knew that there was a difference, and they were a little persnickety about it. But from our perspective, we're kind of like, one size fits all. But anyway, so Sergey, I put 3 different guys with him, and they would only ride with him for a week, maybe 2 weeks max, and then they would quit without a word. I'd say, what's wrong? Well, how come you're quitting? I thought you thought this was going to be a good job, and you pay good, everything good. Oh, my wife, they always say, my wife wants me to be home. It's like, well, this is a good truck driving job. You're only gone 2, 3, 4 days out of the week, and you're home the rest of the time. For as far as trucking goes, that's a pretty good schedule. And especially making as much money as they did at the time, which I paid pretty well. So, probably one of the reasons why I'm not in business, I'm just saying. But no regrets on my part. So anyway, Sergey went through 3 different drivers, and I didn't know the reason why. Nobody would say the reason why. So I asked Vladdy if he would ride with Sergey, and one of their favorite sayings was, no problem. And it was, I don't know why they liked that one so much, but everything was, no problem, Dennis, no problem. So anyway, Vladdy was like, okay, I'll ride with Sergey. I see what the problem is, but there's no problem, Dennis. Don't you worry. Now, just to tell you a little bit more about Vladdy, I told you he was a big guy, not real tall, but thick, and gave the impression of power. Well, I talked to him once, and he said when he was in the Ukraine, he had a job working in a mine. Now, human labor was cheap. Everybody got the same nothing across the board. You didn't like, well, if I get this job, I could get paid more. No, everybody had the same nothing. No matter how hard you worked, you had the same nothing. No matter how little you worked, you had the same nothing. So, that's when everybody's got it equal and even. That's what we call pure socialism right there, okay? So, everybody had the same nothing. Except for the elites, I'm just saying. So, with So, with Vladimir, he worked in this mine, and they used humans to haul stuff like animals. And it was like I think it was a 2-mile trek overland, and they were hauling, I can't remember what it was that Vladdy said that they hauled on their backs, but it was a 200-pound load. and they made 2 trips a day. Back with a load, come back without a load, get a load, go back. And so Vladdy said to his boss, he says, I make 2 loads, 1 trip, can I go home? His boss was like, yes, Vladimir, if you want to make 1 trip, 2 loads, you go home. So anyway, that's what Vladdy did. 400 pounds on his back. I don't know how he did it. Overland 2 miles, go home. That's the kind of man that Vladdy was. Just to tell you what comes next here in this story. So, Vladdy rode with Sergey for about 3 weeks. I didn't hear a yes or no. And that was not Vladimir's regular job. He had a better regular job because he had seniority. So I asked him after about 3 weeks, so how's it going with Sergey? Oh, no problem, Dennis, no problem. And I go, are you sure? Now, I told you, they don't narc on each other. They don't do that. But Vladimir was really loyal to me. And I said, are you sure? Because, you're going to go back to your normal thing, and then I'm going to put guys with Sergey, and if there's a problem, then they're going to quit, and it's hurting my business. Oh, you could tell it was just tore up Vladimir to say anything. He was just thinking, oh, what do I do? What do I do? You don't narc on people. That's just a given. But yet, he never had anybody that he'd worked for that he really felt loyal to. And he felt very loyal towards me. And it was very reciprocated, too. And I basically said, I got to try to figure this out. If there's why would people quit when they ride with Sergey? And he goes, well, maybe it's little problem. And I said, what's the little problem? And he said, well, when new driver get in truck, Sergey tell them that he's boss of truck. And if they don't do what he says, that he will stick a knife in their throat while they sleep. I'm like, that's a big problem, Vladdy. And he's like, no, it's just a little problem. And I says, did he say that to you? And he goes, yes, he says that to me. And I said, what did you say? I told him to shut mouth or I punch hole in chest, tear his heart out, and throw it out the window. Okay, I believe that Vladdy could have done that. That he would have been mad enough to do that? I'd never seen him mad like that. But he said he would punch hole in chest, tear heart out, and throw it out the window. Apparently, he was boss of truck when Sergey was in there. Anyway, so I sent Vladimir back to what he normally did, which was a cush thing, and for prima donnas that had worked for me a long time, and that type of thing. Anyway, and I fired Sergey's butt. And I tell you what, when I had to fire somebody, I always thought that it was important to do it face to face. I had stuff scattered all over the West, and I always made sure that I went directly to someplace and fired somebody face to face, and tell them, the reason why I was firing them. And I, one of the few times that I fired somebody with pleasure, because I hated firing people. But I tell you what, it was with pleasure that I went to Sergey and told him he was a bad guy and that he was not going to work for me any longer because I cared about my people and he didn't care about anybody but himself. He needed to go find a different job. So I fired him right to his face. But anyway, that's a little bit about Vladimir. I probably got more stories in the future about Vladdy, but he's a good guy. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more family-friendly, true stories. These are all true stories. They actually happened. I either know that they happened or I seen them happen. Make sure you ring the bell and give her a thumbs up. That's right. It's just like blinking your lights and tooting your horn. It's the polite thing to do. So, take it easy. Keep your shiny side up and dirty side down. Make sure you look further in your hood ornament and don't be a bumper sticker. You might have to get peeled off sometime. It makes you look unprofessional. I tell you what, that is an unprofessional thing. All these guys just bumper to tail, bumper, nose to tail, nose to tail. That is so unprofessional. Come on, guys. Be a professional. All right? And if you're in a four-wheeler, it's the same thing. This isn't Daytona 500. Don't draft the car in front of you. You don't have to be a professional to look professional. I'm just saying. All right. See you on the flip side. We gone.